Hey everyone, welcome to this deep dive. Today we're going to get into something that I think is super relevant to pretty much everyone, and that is faith. Um, or even if you don't consider yourself a religious person, just a general sense of meaning in life and how that actually plays out in your day-to-day world.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's so cool about this text we're diving into is it's not afraid to get into the nitty-gritty.
It really isn't.
It's not just about faith as this like perfect solution to everything, but actually how it shows up in the messiness of everyday experience.
Totally. And one of the things that really stood out to me early on is this idea of faith as a fortress.
Okay.
The source talks about it as this like source of strength when things inevitably get tough.
Yeah, and it's almost like having this internal framework, right? Built by your belief.
Yeah,
That kind of helps you make sense of when things feel really chaotic.
I like that.
It's not about like erasing the hardship,
Yeah.
but it's like giving you the resilience to move through it. The text
Yeah.
actually has this really powerful story about a woman named Sarah who gets this serious diagnosis. And instead of falling into despair, she finds strength in her belief that even in suffering, there's like a greater purpose unfolding.
That's a good example. And I think it reminds me of that quote from the source that says, faith doesn't eliminate the storm, but it gives you an anchor in the midst of it.
Right.
Have you ever kind of experienced that anchoring effect in your own life?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there have been times when my own sense of meaning and purpose, even when it's been really challenged, has helped me kind of find that path forward.
Yeah, totally. And, I can see how that kind of inner strength could affect every area of life, especially relationships. And speaking of that, the source really emphasizes this idea that faith can be like this powerful bonding agent,
Yeah.
this relationship glue, as they call it.
It's not just about, sharing rituals or practices or things like that.
Yeah.
The text argues that faith or even just shared values in general create this like common language for navigating the ups and downs of relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually use the example of marriage being viewed as a sacred covenant in
Yeah.
some Christian traditions.
Ooh, can you unpack that a little? What does the idea of a sacred covenant kind of imply?
Yeah, so it suggests that marriage isn't just this like legal contract or agreement. It's actually a spiritual commitment ordained by a higher power.
Wow.
And that belief can really shape how couples approach things like conflict or forgiveness,
I see.
and even how they define their roles within the relationship.
So it's almost like adding another layer of depth and intentionality to that bond.
Exactly. It's about seeing that relationship through a lens of shared values and spiritual purpose.
That's really interesting. Now, I'm curious, how do you see that playing out in your own relationships?
Well, I think even outside of specifically religious contexts, having shared values is crucial for any strong relationship.
Right.
It's about that bedrock of understanding and mutual respect.
Makes sense. So we've talked about the tough times, the relationships. Now, the source also gets into this fascinating idea of faith affecting your work life.
Oh, yeah.
And I was really
Mhm.
interested in that.
This is where it gets really cool because the text kind of challenges this idea that work is just a means to an end, right? Like just a way to make money. It suggests that your faith can actually transform your work into a calling.
A calling.
Yeah, like a way to express your purpose in the world.
That's so cool. And the source talks about how some people might even see their professional success as a way to contribute to something much bigger than themselves.
Exactly.
Aligning their work with their values.
Yeah, and there's this great example they give of this young entrepreneur who's motivated by his faith's emphasis on social justice.
Okay.
And so he builds this successful business that focuses on providing fair trade goods and empowering marginalized communities.
Wow.
So he sees his work as a direct expression of his faith.
I love that. That's a powerful example of aligning passion with purpose.
Totally.
But,
Right.
the source also mentions those potential downsides of letting faith guide your career choices,
Yeah,
especially like feeling limited to certain professions or maybe feeling trapped in a certain path.
that's a good point.
Yeah.
And it raises those questions about how to find that balance between pursuing what feels like a calling and those practical realities,
Right.
like, financial stability and career opportunities.
Totally. So what are your thoughts on navigating that potential tension?
I think it takes real introspection and discernment.
Yeah.
It's about honestly assessing what your skills are and your passions are, but also considering the potential impact your work can have,
Yeah.
even in small ways.
I like that. It's like finding that sweet spot where your talents, your values, and your work all intersect.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
about a path that feels both fulfilling and purposeful.
I love that. And speaking of impact, the source takes a deep dive into the intersection of faith and social change. And I'm
Yeah.
really excited to get into this.
Me too. This is where things get really interesting.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. We've been unpacking how faith shows up in these very personal parts of life, like dealing with challenges, finding strength in relationships. But then there's also this whole other dimension of faith's role in the wider world,
Right.
right? And the source definitely doesn't shy away from that.
It really doesn't. And this is where things get, I think, even more complex.
Mhm.
The source talks about how faith often motivates people to tackle these big social issues,
Yeah.
like fighting for equality or helping those in need.
It's like this drive to make the world a better place, fueled by the values and the beliefs that are at the heart of their faith. And the text specifically highlights the role that religious organizations have played historically in movements for civil rights and poverty alleviation.
Mm.
And they give the example of Catholic nuns working on the front lines of social justice.
Wow, that's powerful. But the source also kind of acknowledges the flip side of that,
Hey,
right?
absolutely.
Like how faith can also be a source of division when it comes to those same social issues. Yeah, this is where it gets really nuanced and often sensitive.
Right.
For instance, the source mentions the example of same-sex marriage,
Okay.
where you have some faith traditions that fully embrace and celebrate LGBTQ relationships,
Yeah.
while others maintain that marriage should only be between a man and a woman based on their interpretation of religious texts.
Right. So how do we even begin to navigate those conversations, especially when faith is so deeply personal and tied to people's core values?
I think it comes down to approaching those conversations with empathy and a willingness to understand different viewpoints, even if you disagree with them.
That's a great point.
The source really emphasizes the importance of listening, respecting boundaries, and remembering that these issues are often multifaceted,
Mhm.
with deeply held beliefs on all sides.
It's a good reminder that even within a shared faith, you can have very different interpretations and applications of those beliefs.
Exactly. And that diversity of thought can actually be enriching, even if it's challenging at times.
Totally. So we've seen how faith can inspire positive action in the world, but also lead to these really complex disagreements. I'm curious for you personally, how do you see faith contributing to social change?
For me, it's about finding that balance between advocating for what I believe in while also being open to learning from people who have different perspectives.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, shifting gears a bit, the source also spends some time talking about the personal growth aspect of faith.
Right.
This idea of faith as a path of self-discovery, reflection, and transformation.
It's about cultivating that inner life,
Hmm.
going beyond just outward actions to explore these deeper questions of meaning and purpose. The text mentions practices like prayer and meditation, even things like journaling as ways to connect with yourself and foster that deeper connection with your faith.
I like how they emphasize that this inward journey is just as important as those outward expressions of faith. It's about cultivating that inner strength and clarity.
And the source makes the argument that this internal work can actually lead to positive changes in how you interact with the world.
Like,
So, for example, they share a story about a man who's struggling with anger and resentment. And through prayer and reflection,
yeah.
he's able to cultivate forgiveness and compassion.
Hmm.
And that actually has this ripple effect on his relationships.
So it's like this inner transformation leads to outward change.
Precisely. And the text also points out how faith can be a source of accountability,
Yeah.
encouraging individuals to live with integrity and generosity.
It's like having that internal compass guiding your actions and choices. What about for you? Has faith played a role in your personal growth journey?
Without a doubt, it's given me a framework for self-reflection and helped me cultivate things like resilience and compassion.
That's really inspiring. But the source doesn't sugarcoat things either. It doesn't pretend that living out your faith is always easy.
Oh, yeah, of course not.
And one of the first challenges they address is actually the experience of doubt,
Yeah,
which I think is something that almost everyone wrestles with at some point.
absolutely.
Mm.
And the source points out that those doubts can feel even more profound when you're dealing with loss or pain or suffering.
Mm-hmm.
It can be really hard to reconcile your belief in a loving and just world with the reality of hardship and tragedy.
Right. And the text gives this really poignant example of a mother whose child was diagnosed with a terminal illness.
Yeah,
And she's wrestling with her faith, asking, why would a loving God allow this to happen?
it's a question that so many people have grappled with throughout history. And the source doesn't offer these easy answers or platitudes.
Right.
Instead, it suggests that those doubts can actually be an opportunity for growth.
For growth.
Wrestling with those difficult questions can deepen and refine your faith.
It's like those challenges force you to examine your beliefs
Yeah.
and come to a more nuanced understanding of your faith.
Exactly. It's about finding a faith that can hold both joy and sorrow, hope and doubt.
Now, another challenge the source brings up is living out your faith in a world that sometimes feels at odds with your values.
Yeah, that's a big one for a lot of people. Yeah. The source points out that in a society that's increasingly secular,
Right.
where logic and reason are often prioritized, faith can feel marginalized or even dismissed.
It's like you're speaking two different languages sometimes. And the text actually gives an example of a young man who felt pressured to hide his faith in his academic setting.
Oh, wow.
He's afraid of judgment or ridicule.
Yeah, that's a real concern for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Feeling like they have to compartmentalize their faith, keep it separate from their professional or social lives.
It's got to feel isolating.
It can be. And the source acknowledges that finding a way to integrate your faith into a secular world is a constant challenge.
Yeah.
It's about finding that balance between staying true to your beliefs while also engaging with the world around you.
Right. It's a balancing act for sure.
Yeah.
And speaking of navigating different perspectives, the source also gets into the complexities of religious diversity.
Yeah, this is huge, especially in today's world.
Yeah.
The text points out that while religious diversity can be a source of enrichment and learning, it can also lead to misunderstandings and even conflict.
Right. And I think it really comes down to recognizing that while we may have different beliefs, we can still coexist and engage with each other respectfully.
Absolutely. And the source suggests that faith itself can actually provide a framework for navigating those differences.
Okay, how so?
Well, for example, many faith traditions emphasize things like compassion, empathy, and understanding.
So rather than seeing those differences as these insurmountable barriers, we can use our faith as a bridge to connect with those who hold different views.
Exactly. It's about finding common ground,
Yeah.
recognizing our shared humanity, and building relationships based on mutual respect.
That's such a powerful message in a world that can feel increasingly divided.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually leads us nicely into the final part of this deep dive, where we'll explore what all of this means for you and your own personal journey. So welcome back. It feels like we've covered so much ground in this deep dive into faith and everyday life. We've talked about how faith can be this source of strength, how it shows up in our relationships and even our work, and how it can inspire us to make a difference in the world.
Yeah, and we didn't shy away from the tough stuff either, right? All those challenges that come up, like doubt or living in a world that doesn't always seem to share your values.
Absolutely. It's been quite a journey, but I think it's time now to turn the focus back to you, the listener. We've explored all these concepts, but ultimately it comes down to what resonates with you in your own life.
Right, because the source material doesn't try to lay out this one-size-fits-all path.
It doesn't.
And I think that's actually a good thing. If faith, whatever form it takes for you, is such a personal experience.
Absolutely. It really looks different for everyone. But the source does leave us with this really powerful thought to consider. And I think it's a perfect way to wrap things up. They pose the question, what role do you want faith to play in your life moving forward?
And that's such a great question to sit with for a while. Because as we've seen, faith can be both this source of comfort when things get tough,
Yeah.
but also this catalyst for stepping outside your comfort zone and actually making a difference in the world.
Right? It's like this beautiful paradox, this inner strength that can have these ripple effects outward.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So as you kind of reflect on everything we've talked about, I want you to consider this. How can you harness that power? Whether it's through organized religion or personal spiritual practice, or even just a strong sense of purpose.
Yeah.
How can you use that to find peace within yourself and also contribute to the world around you?
What a great question. What values do you want to live by? What kind of impact do you want to make in the world? And what are some steps, even small ones, that you can take to start aligning your life with those beliefs?
I love that. These are questions that don't necessarily have easy answers, but they're the questions worth asking.
Totally. Your journey with faith, however that looks for you, is uniquely your own. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us as we explored this topic. It's been amazing to have you here, and I hope this sparked some insightful reflections for you.
Absolutely. Keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and keep seeking that which gives your life meaning and purpose. Until next time.